Hello, my name is Phil Easter, historian and writer from Baltimore, Maryland, also known as the Amazing Memory Man. We are recording tonight on Sunday, February 12th, 2023. This is Super Bowl Sunday, the big game this year, being held in Arizona between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. But tonight's story, famous people born in February. A number of famous people that I've memorized their birth dates, and I will share some stories about them. The great actor Clark Gable was born February 1st, 1901. He starred in many movies, especially during the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and of course, the most famous movie he was in was, of course, one of the most celebrated movies of all time, Gone with the Wind, winner of 10 Academy Awards, including Best Picture of 1939. A few years before that, he was also in the 1935 production of Mutiny on the Bounty, the famous story of how a group of sailors on the British ship Bounty rebelled against Captain Bligh. The actual story, of course, took place in the year 1789, and there have been several movies made of the Mutiny on the Bounty, but the one in 1935, starring Clark Gable, won Best Picture of the Year. Again, Clark Gable, born February 1st, 1901. February 5th was the birthday of the great baseball player Hank Aaron, born in 1934. In 1974, he became very famous when on the night of April 8th, 1974, he hit home run number 715 of his career, passing the legendary Babe Ruth, who had 714 home runs in his magnificent career. Hank Aaron went on to hit a number of home runs, I think 41 more, and he finished with 755 when he retired in 1976. I was privileged to see him in 2 baseball games, in 1975 in Boston and here in Baltimore in 1976, the last year he played. I saw him in a game against the Orioles. Hank Aaron, the all-time run beat batted in champion, most RBIs in baseball history, had over 2,000 RBIs. And when he retired, he was number 1 in home runs. In 2007, Barry Bonds hit just 7 more home runs when he retired that year with 762. But as many people know, he was a steroid user. And that's cheating. So as far as I'm concerned, Hank Aaron is still truly the home run king, born February 5th, 1934. Well, the very next day, February 6th, is that of Babe Ruth. Speaking of Babe Ruth, these 2 great sluggers, back to back, February 5th and 6th. But Babe Ruth was born in 1895 at 216 Emory Street in Baltimore, Maryland. As a young man, he went to the St. Mary's Industrial School in Baltimore, and at age 19, he signed his minor league baseball contract with the Baltimore Orioles, who at that time were a minor league team, not the major league team that they are now. Had they been a major league team, no doubt Babe Ruth would have stayed in Baltimore. But he went up to the Boston Red Sox, played for the Red Sox for 6 years, 1914 to 1919, as a pitcher mainly, but he could hit so well that the last year or so there, they played him in the outfield so he could play more games. But the owner of the Red Sox sold him to the New York Yankees in 1920. And so between 1920 and 1934, 15 seasons with the New York Yankees, he set some amazing records, shattering home run records. In 1920, he belted out 54 homers. The previous record was 29. The next year, in 1921, he had 59 home runs. Then 6 years later, in 1927, age 32 at that point. Some people thought he was a little past his prime. So what did he do? He hit 60 home runs in 1 year, a record that would stand for 34 years. He played his last year with the Boston Braves. So he played really in just two major league cities, New York and Boston, but technically three teams, Boston Red Sox, New York Yankees, and Boston Braves. Retired in 1935. He died in 1948. But he was born again, February 6, 1895, and on that day, 16 years later, Ronald Reagan was born in the state of Illinois. He later became a famous movie actor, and then he was elected governor of California for 2 terms. He served as governor from 1967 through 1975. In 1980, he won the Republican nomination for president. In the November election, he defeated incumbent Jimmy Carter. He was president for 8 years, 1981 through 1989. On the day he took office, January 20, 1981, was the day about 50 American hostages were freed in Iran. They had been held prisoner for 444 days. Ronald Reagan easily won re-election in 1984. He defeated Walter Mondale, who only won one state, the state of Minnesota. Reagan won 49 out of 50 states, including Maryland and Massachusetts, which almost always go Democrat. He was that popular, a very popular president. Ronald Reagan, born February 6, 1911. February 7th was the birthday of the great English writer, Charles Dickens. He wrote many novels, including my personal favorite novel, A Tale of Two Cities. And he was born February 7th, 1812. Many years later, he would come to America several times and give readings of some of his novels to the public. Charles Dickens, born February 7th, 1812. February 9th was the birthday of William Henry Harrison, who was born February 9th, 1773. He became our country's 9th president, but he was only president for 1 month exactly. He took office on March 4th, 1841, at age 68. He gave his inauguration speech in pouring rain for 2 hours, and he caught pneumonia because of that, and died 1 month later on April 4th, 1841. You can hardly judge his presidency whether it was good or bad. It was just so short, unfortunately. Just 30 days. William Henry Harrison, born on February 9th. But today, February 12th, is a very interesting date, for you have arguably one of the 2 greatest presidents in American history was born on February 12th, 1809. Abraham Lincoln, born in Kentucky on this day in 1809, and in England on the very same day, Charles Darwin was born. The man who made great studies on animals and plants during much of the 19th century. He traveled to many places, made special scientific studies. That's really amazing, isn't it? That 2 great men were born the very same day, Lincoln and Darwin, both born on February 12, 1809. February 17th, the birthday of one of the greatest basketball players of all time, Michael Jordan, will turn 60 this year in just a few more days, for he was born on February 17th, 1963, in New York City. For much of his life, he lived in North Carolina and also the city of Chicago, because he played for the Chicago Bulls for many years, and a few more with the Washington Wizards. But I think he calls North Carolina home, but it is interesting, he was born on February 17, 1963, in Brooklyn, New York. Michael Jordan, one of the greatest basketball players ever, winner of 6 NBA titles. Twice was on the gold medal United States Olympic team, 1984 and 1992. And in his freshman year at North Carolina, in the 1982 basketball season, they won the National College Championship. So he won various types of championships that very few players can ever say. They won at least one college championship, Olympic gold medals, and NBA titles. Michael Jordan turning 60 on February 17th. February 22nd, the birthday of the first President of the United States, George Washington, born February 22nd, 1732. He was the great general in our American Revolution, helped winning America's independence from Great Britain, and became our first president. He served from 1789 to 1797, 2 terms as president. He died 2 years later in 1799. But also born on February 22nd, exactly 200 years to the day after George Washington was born, in 1932, Senator Ted Kennedy from Massachusetts, one of the famous Kennedy brothers of that family where, as many of you know, John Kennedy was president, and then his brother Robert ran for president in 1968, and sadly he too was assassinated. But Ted Kennedy lived many years, a senator from Massachusetts, one of the longest serving senators in American history. He died in 2009. But he, like George Washington, born February 22nd, I do find it interesting that it was exactly 200 years apart that they were born to the very day. One of my favorite movie actresses of all time was Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor became famous in the late 1940s when she was a young lady making certain movies such as National Velvet. And she made many movies in the 50s and 60s. Her most famous role was, of course, of the great Egyptian queen, Cleopatra. That movie was made 60 years ago in 1963. Elizabeth Taylor was born February 27th, 1932. And as I say, Cleopatra is actually considered probably the most sought-after role for an actress in movie history, second only to the role of Scarlett O'Hara in 1939, which was played by Vivien Leigh in Gone with the Wind. Where I mentioned earlier, Clark Gable was the great actor in that movie, and Vivien Leigh was the actress who played opposite Clark Gable. But next to that role, the most sought-after female role in movie history was for Cleopatra in 1963, and many popular actresses of that time period were hoping to get it. Elizabeth Taylor was paid $1 million just to make the movie. That does not count residuals later from tickets. But she was the first actor or actress, the first acting person in movie history to be paid up front $1 million, which was a tremendous sum back then. Many were just paid like $100,000 or even less than that, even if they were pretty well-known actors at that time, up front. So I know now, of course, it's way off the charts, like in all types of entertainment, sports, actors too get paid many millions, I'm sure, even before a movie's made when they sign a contract. But 60 years ago, $1 million up front was considered a tremendous sum of money. Elizabeth Taylor, born February 27th, 1932. Those are the famous people that I know who birthdays for the month of February, and I'm glad I could share some of their stories with you tonight. This is Phil Easter, the Amazing Memory Man. We'll see you next time, another story on another subject. Thank you and good night.